Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on July 1st, 2025. Shout out to our friends in Canada. It's Canada Day. All right, I want to talk about my efforts, and they're frustrating. I got to tell you, it's not going well. To educate Americans in particular in the world at large about basic American history as it relates to the Kennedys, the Kennedy assassination, and the role of Zionists in that assassination. This is apparently the third rail of journalism, even on the alternative side, even on the, you name it, nobody wants to touch it. And it's ridiculous because facts are facts. I want to give you an example of some of the crazy stuff I've seen just recently. A very famous ex-CAI guy who seems to be a good guy was on a high-profile show I like a lot, and he made the ridiculous claim that Richard Nixon is the reason the United States changed its attitude towards Israel. This is an educated man. I don't know where he came up with that. Okay, let's get to the facts. John F. Kennedy was fighting the Zionists on their effort to build a nuclear weapons program. Okay, that's known. It's not disputable. We've got the receipts. There's no question about it. It's a historical fact. Okay, after Kennedy got shot, in came Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson dropped it. And he let the Israelis, the Zionists, go ahead and turn their nuclear material into nuclear weapons. That's a fact. We also had the SS Liberty, USSS Liberty. Israelis deliberately murdered dozens of U.S. servicemen in broad daylight, and Lyndon Baines Johnson let it slide. What else do we know about Lyndon Johnson? He was the only guy, he was the first guy, pardon me, the first president in history to give Israel offensive weapons. Back in the Truman era, it was actually illegal to ship weapons of any kind to Palestine, to the Zionists. It was illegal, okay? And then bit by bit, we want to be the big, we want to play the big chess game. We started sending defensive weapons. Even Kennedy sent defensive weapons to Israel. It was LBJ who sent offensive weapons. He also quadrupled the amount of financial aid to Israel over what Kennedy had done. He also replaced, after the 1967 war, he replaced the French, who were Israel's supporters. They were the main providers of offensive weapons to Israel. Well, after the 1967 war, they looked at Israel and said, oh, this is not so good. I don't know if we want to be involved in this. And Lyndon Baines Johnson picked up the ball and ran with it. What else do we know about Johnson? He had family members, close family members, his aunt in particular, who were not only Christian Zionists, they were leaders of the Christian Zionist movement in Texas. Okay? We also know from, he was very involved in business, much of it criminal. In fact, had Kennedy not been killed, very possible Lyndon Baines Johnson might have been indicted. That's how criminal he was. And his partners just happened to be Zionists. He also was best friends with a couple. They were Zionist terrorists. Literally, that's what they did. There's no two ifs, ands, or buts about it. And they were frequent guests at the White House. They were frequent guests at his ranch. And they even bought property near the ranch so they could be close to him. So we've got a CIA guy who, I'm not going to mention his name because I haven't had a chance to talk with him personally about this, who got on a very high-profile show and made the claim that Richard Nixon is the person who changed America's relationship with Israel. That is not true. Now, going down the LBJ rabbit hole slightly deeper, but not much deeper, I mentioned earlier that LBJ was literally on the verge of either being politically disgraced or being indicted. He was involved with a lot of criminal activity. One of his key people was indicted, and it was going to point back to him eventually. So Lyndon Johnson, in addition to being Zionist friendly, had a strong incentive for JFK to be killed. All right. So there's even now the Zionist angle is always left out. It's left out of all the assassination scholar research. However, there are entire books that have been written about LBJ and his potential connection to the assassination. In fact, some books go right out and say LBJ did it. Now, guaranteed LBJ was helpful, right? I mean, he was able to shut down the investigation. Was he not? He did a good job. We had the Warren Commission. That was not a real investigation. He had a lot of political power in Texas, which means, do they call them state troopers? What are they? They have some special name for those guys. Texas Rangers. They should have been involved in a murder in Texas. I don't see any involvement by them at all. So let's look at this. Let's pull back and look at this. We've got a ex-CIA agent who appears to be a good guy. He's on every outlet you can imagine. Anytime he needs to talk about something, I guess he just picks up the phone and they put him on. And he was on a high-profile show telling the American public that it was Richard Nixon that changed the U.S. relationship to Israel. There is a practice in the CIA of tell 99 things true so that you can slip in one lie. I don't know what this man's motivation was. He surely has to know better. He absolutely can't believe what he said. So this is the kind of thing that we are up against when we try to educate people about their real history. Let's go now to the second aspect of this. So it's now common to say the CIA had a hand in killing Kennedy. They certainly had a hand in the cover-up. There's no dispute about that part. It's common to say organized crime had a hand in the assassination of Kennedy. That is not something that's considered crazy talk. As I mentioned earlier, there are people that think LBJ had a hand in the assassination of Kennedy. We've already talked about the Zionist connections of Lyndon Johnson. They're deep. He did a lot of favors for Israel. He made modern Israel possible, which is what's made this genocide in Gaza possible. By the way, that's what this is all about. I don't give a rat's ass about Israel. I don't give a rat's ass about the Zionist movement. I couldn't care less. I happen to have a lot of friends who are Jewish. They're great human beings. They are all against what Israel's doing, by the way. All right. So the only reason I'm bringing this up and making this a story is because of Gaza. All right. We have too many Americans, fuzzy-headed Christian Zionists, and all kinds of, leftist nonsense purveyors who are still saying Israel has a right to defend itself, and are ignoring. Basically, at this point, the Zionists are out-Naziing the Nazis. Okay? I mean, in case you're not following it, after murdering tens of thousands of innocent civilians, they are now ordering their troops, and this is a news item, to shoot people that are going to get relief. And now there's news that they have been mixing oxycodone, which is a terrible drug, in with the flour that is being distributed. If they're not worse than the Nazis, they're right on par. And by the way, talk about censored history. The Nazis and the Zionists had diplomatic relationships throughout the war. They made deals. Nazis went and stayed in Palestine. There's even a commemorative coin that was made way back when that happened. It's got the swastika on one side and the Star of David, which has been stolen by the Zionists, on the other side. These are facts of history. Other facts of history that people aren't being told. It's not that it's not just that they're not being told. It is being suppressed. Anybody that talks about this will not get a hearing unless they're unbelievably persistent. And I've been lucky in a few places, but mostly nobody wants to talk about this. The other area where the Zionists were very active in the 20s and 30s was in collaborations with the Italian fascists. And history tells us that Mussolini took over Italy in 22. and young Adolf Hitler studied Mussolini's methods, and they were good buddies. So really, I mean, they're all bad, but the original bad guy was Mussolini, and he was very, very friendly with the Zionists, and they were very, very friendly with him. He arranged for them to get military training in Italy in the 1930s. Okay, and why did the Zionists like him? Because they loved the way he bombed and killed and maimed Ethiopian civilians in Mussolini's empire building exercise. They thought this is a guy that understands what needs to be done in the Middle East. Let's talk about the Rothschilds. All right. Occasionally you hear, oh, you know, Rothschild, the Balfour Declaration, and and this is made very, very vague. I don't know why it's so freaking vague. All right. Now, first of all, whether the Rothschilds are Jewish or Tibetan or Hungarian doesn't matter. They're bankers, and I think they're about as Jewish as Charles Manson, frankly, the Rothschilds. What you have to understand about and it's not the Rothschilds at this point, though they probably have a lot of family members still running things, but it is a vast banking enterprise and empire that they don't teach you about in school. They certainly won't teach you about it in the media. They won't teach about it in the alternative media. Okay? They had so much money that they financed entire countries. Okay? They changed the course of the destiny of entire countries. We're aware of, only vaguely aware of their role in building up the Zionists in Israel. But let's take it off Israel and just look at a random country like Guatemala. Okay? Do you ever hear about the Rothschilds being involved in Guatemala? I guarantee you have not. But I was there, spent quite a bit of time in Guatemala. I was having a conversation with a human rights attorney in the city of Chela, which is, it's got a longer name, but that's the nickname for it. And that's the center, the historical center of the Guatemalan coffee trade. And you have to ask this question, how did coffee get to Guatemala? Like, that's an Ethiopian plant. That's a Yemeni plant. They were the ones growing it. That was the source of coffee. But what happened was an agent of the Rothschilds, which means an employee of the Rothschilds, who they sent guys to travel the world and look for massive business opportunities. And they discovered that the certain areas in Guatemala and other parts of Central America, but Guatemala primarily, are perfect for growing coffee. So the coffee didn't just fly across the Atlantic and start growing in Guatemala. Some entity had to put up massive amounts of capital, insane amounts of capital, to do what? To, one, identify and make alliances with all the landowners. Two, to pitch them on the idea of growing coffee. Three, to pitch them on the idea of borrowing money to start coffee plantations. Four, to build railroads to transport the coffee, warehouses, banking services, ports, okay? And then the plants had to be transferred over, and expert horticulturalists had to be transported over, and they had to train the workers. And so what the Rothschilds ended up with is a cash cow to this day. They still have their fingers in the coffee industry in Guatemala, and they get a piece of it every year. Imagine this, and no one's ever talked to you about this. Imagine, because they had the money. They had in the 19th century, the Rothschild banking empire had the most money in the world. They dwarfed everyone else. I mean, people like Musk and Bezos, they're clowns compared to the Rothschilds in terms of size of wealth, stability, reach, and sophistication. Right? So that's just one country. The other country, the other region they had their eyes on, and they had their eyes all over the planet because they had the money to do it and the human resources to do it, was Palestine. Now, you've heard of the Suez Canal. I think everybody's heard of it. It runs through Egypt. Who built the Suez Canal? The British and the French working together. And by the way, they just appropriated the land, right? Hey, guys, we're coming through. We're building a canal. And it's going to be ours, right? That's expensive, right? Like if I said to you, hey, go build yourself a house. Well, you're either going to have to save a lot of money, or you're going to have to go to a banker, or you're going to have to do something. You're not going to build a house just based on a whim. Do you think you can build a canal that goes all the way through Egypt, all the way to the Red Sea on a whim? The money had to come from somewhere. Who kickstarted it? The Rothschilds. Why? Again, they have a global, and again, we're not talking about the family. We're talking about a financial entity that is now, in excess of 200 years old. And they made the calculation that we've got to have a quicker path between the East and the West, between Asia and Europe. That still is important. The Suez Canal is still the most important transport system in the world, pretty much, except for the Panama Canal. But I think the Suez Canal is even more important. So they kickstarted the funding of it. All right. So now let's look at the Balfour Declaration, which was Rothschild inspired. And the Rothschilds, from the get-go, were spending money to help finance, because you got to finance. You can't move from Poland or wherever these guys were coming from to Palestine and just make it go, right? You need financing. So who financed that? The bank. We'll just call them the bank. Why did they do that? All right. Because they wanted to have European-minded people who are dependent on them placed in the center of the Middle East. Why? Because it behooved their financial interests. And now, fast forward to the 1950s. One of their financial interests was the Suez Canal. You don't think the Rothschilds were the angel investors on that and then walked away? I'm sure that banking entity has a piece of that, all the action, and there's a lot of action that goes through that canal. So a new president came into Egypt in the 50s, and he said, you know what? This thing's running through our country. We're going to appropriate it. We'll pay you, but it's ours. Okay? What happened then? You always hear about the Suez Crisis, or maybe you don't, but a lot of people have heard about the Suez Crisis. Did France send an army in? No. Did England send their army in? No. What army attacked Egypt after the Egyptians took back their own land along the canal? Israel. Did you know that? Why weren't you taught that in school? Why weren't the 1,000,001 podcasters who are, deep diggers tell you that basic fact? Israel is, as early as the 40s, was put in place. As early as the 50s, was already acting as a thug on behalf of this banking entity. Let's look at another example of Israel operating as thugs on behalf of a banking entity. Algeria. Okay. People don't know much about Algeria. They should know that the year before he was killed, President Kennedy invited the new president, the first president of Algeria, because they had been a colonial power under France for about 150 years, invited him to a reception at the White House. And it was the most lavish reception you can imagine. And if I can get it together, we'll run clips right now while I'm talking so you can see. And if not, you can go to YouTube and look it up yourself. And I ask you, when you're watching this footage, have you ever seen, ever in your entire life, a reception at the White House more lavish than the one Kennedy gave the new president of the newly independent Algeria? No, you haven't. Okay, think about that. Now, did the Rothschild entity, the bank, have money in Algeria? Oh, you bet they did. Did they stand to lose a lot of money if Algeria became an independent country? Oh, you bet they did. And who was on the forefront of making sure that didn't happen? Well, obviously right-wing crazy Frenchmen. But guess who sent troops and surrogates to Algeria to fight along with the right-wing French to massacre Algerian villagers over the whole range of time of the occupation, the colonialization of Algeria? 1/3 of the entire population of Algeria was murdered by the French. And the Israelis, towards the end, pitched in and helped with that murdering too. Okay? And who are they doing it on behalf of? Banking interests. Banking interests. So what is Israel all about? Israel is all about banking interests, multinational. They honor no country. They honor no ethics, wanting to have their thugs, their gangsters in the Middle East. And they've been using them to do what? To destabilize every single country they can. Lebanon, obviously, Syria, obviously, they help coordinate the U.S. to get involved in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And what's the point of that? The point of that is to keep those countries chaotic and poor. Why? So their resources can be extracted at a low rate. Who benefits from that? Banking entities. Banking entities. This is all basic, indisputable history. And the Kennedy brothers, the two of them together, Kennedy was trying to stop Israel from getting nuclear weapons. He instructed his brother Robert to make them follow the law in lobbying. And that's another thing that went by the wayside when LBJ became president. So we accept that LBJ, the CIA, and organized crime were somehow involved in the assassination of Kennedy, but it's always vague, right? And the links to Zionists, always vague. How could that be? How many hundreds, if not thousands of books have been written about the Kennedy assassination? And they never mention this basic fact. You know, they talk about rogue elements of the CIA. Well, you know, Allen Dulles, not a rogue element. He was former director of the CIA when Kennedy was killed. And he was part of the Warren Commission. Who else is not a rogue element? I've mentioned this guy a million times on our podcast. You'll never hear it anywhere else. James Jesus Angleton. What do we know about him? Well, there's two, not one, but two memorials built to him in Israel. He was considered a Zionist by the Israelis. Now, I think he was either an atheist or an anti-Semitic Zionist. He's not a Jewish guy at all. He's a WASP. But they had a meeting of the minds around the domination of the world, the fascist domination of the world. They agreed with that. One of Angleton's jobs as a young man was to help Nazis and fascists get out of Europe after World War II via Italy. He was actually sent there by the OSS to manage that. Why was he there? Because his father was a big business person in Italy, an American business person in Italy who was friendly with the fascists, entertained fascists. So Angleton would have been raised in a fascist home. He was sent to one of these British boarding schools. He went to Yale. He was recruited by the OSS. He was one of the founders of the Mossad. You know, Mossad didn't fall off a tree. They needed expertise, and one of the people that provided expertise was James Jesus Angleton. In addition, and he was head of the counterintelligence, head of the counterintelligence directorate within the CIA. Well, that's a very, very, very important job. To simplify, counterintelligence is keeping secret. So one thing you do is you go and try to spy on the other spies. The other thing you do is keep those spies from spying on us. But the other thing you do is assist all the other departments, especially the operations departments in the CIA, to keep their secret. That's his job. And he didn't have that job for a year. He didn't have that job for 5 years. He had that job for nearly, I think, 20 years. He was director of counterintelligence through 5 different CIA directors. Sedikov. 5 different CIA directors. Nothing rogue about James Jesus Angleton. And it is historically indisputable that he was actively involved in the suppression of investigations into the JFK assassination. He flew personally all the way to Mexico City after the death of a former CIA station chief down in Mexico City and browbeat the man's widow into allowing him into his private library and took everything, you know, all his books, his files, and most importantly, all the drafts of his memoir. And that particular CIA chief he was not in on the assassination, but because he was head of Mexico City when Oswald supposedly was roaming around Mexico City, he had some questions. And Angleton's job was to make sure that those questions didn't get asked, especially coming from a CIA man who was in the know. And he personally, that's how involved he was in the cover-up. So We talked about the CIA guy that's going around different high-level podcasts and telling people that Nixon changed everything and ignoring LBJ. We also have another, a very high-profile guy, and uh, also on very high market, high audience podcasts to this day talking about the Kennedy assassination, and they talk about, Lee Harvey Oswald. Did he do the shooting? Did he not do the shooting? That is the stupidest question to be asking in 2025. You don't get involved in a debate that's stupid, right? If someone says, oh, the moon is made of green cheese, you don't debate that person. It's a waste of time, and it gives credibility to them. So when this fellow, and he's a great man, he's a great filmmaker, he made the most popular film on the JFK assassination, but I'm afraid he's surrounded by people who are misleading him. He's an executive, he's a producer, he's a director. They can't do all the on the ground research, so he relies on other people. One of his researchers is a stone cold pro-genocide Zionist. Okay, the other one, I don't know. He seems to be able to say James Jesus Angleton, but he seems not to be able to say anything about James Jesus Angleton. Anyway, these guys get on podcasts. They have 500,000 views, 1 million views, 10 million views, 2025, and they're still talking about Oswald. We know that Oswald didn't do, we know that there was a cover-up by the end of 1963. Because what happened? After the shooting, what happened? That week, there was a tree in Dealey Plaza. It was cut down. There was a big road sign in Dealey Plaza. It was removed. There were probably divots in the roadway from bullets. That roadway was repaved. And a sewer connection, grate, whatever you call it, was paved over. Okay? And then the presidential limousine was taken back to Detroit, ripped out. Everything was ripped out, scrubbed, and rebuilt from scratch. All the evidence lost. Okay, so we know the cover-up started immediately. So if there's a cover-up, then Lee Harvey Oswald obviously cannot have been the only person involved, right? Even if you're deluded and think his shot was the key shot, if he even was up there at all. And yet, these people who get all the attention in the world when it comes to the Kennedy assassination at this late date are still going on high audience podcasts talking about did he do it? Did he not do it? They're wasting time. They're distracting people. Am I saying that Zionists and Israel specifically set out to murder Kennedy? No. I am saying they were part of the mix. We know they were part of the mix because the head of counterintelligence was a Zionist, and the Israelis considered him a Zionist, and they considered him a great, great friend. You don't get a memorial built for you in Israel unless you're a great friend of Israel. And then the other element, of course, is organized crime. They always talk about Trafficante. They talk about the guy Carlos Marcello in Louisiana, who also controlled part of Texas. They talk about all these guys. Roselli, the Hollywood guy. They never, ever, ever, or they'll mention him. Oh yeah, this Meyer Lansky guy. Okay, let's understand something. Along with Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky put the organized crime. Okay, he's the one that got everybody together and said, stop shooting each other. We're going to carve out territories. We're going to have rules. We're going to follow them. And we're all going to get way richer than if we're, hijacking each other's beer trucks. All right. And then they developed a commission, which means nothing in organized crime on a high level can happen without the commission getting together and approving it. Do you think that Trafficante and Marcello and whoever else has been, the assassination has been pinned on, made that decision to get involved on their own? You don't think there was a commission meeting where they all sat down and said, whoa, this is a big one. What do we do? I guarantee there was a meeting. And I guarantee Meyer Lansky was at it because he was a permanent member of the commission. There's a third element that there's many elements that connect Lansky to the assassination. Ever heard of Murder Incorporated? Okay, it wasn't 3 guys in Brooklyn. It was a nationwide network of hitmen, and hitman is just another word for assassin. It's the same job. Okay, and the slang is mechanic, and it's a better better descriptor really, because it's a job. You have to know how to surveil. You have to know where your victim is traveling. You have to know everything about his security. You have to know when there are holes in his security. You have to come up with a plan. You have to deploy people to the site. You have to have a plan to do it and get away without being detected. Ideally, you want to create so much confusion that nobody can ever figure out how the heck it actually happened or who actually did it. The mob is expert at that. Add the CIA to that with the cooperation of the mainstream news media and the FBI and Lyndon Johnson, and you've got a great cover-up, right? So Meyer Lansky had all the elements in place to do it, the hit. He also happened to be, I don't think he was a rabid Zionist. He was more of an ethnic Zionist. In other words, hey, I'm Jewish. I don't like what's happening in Israel. But he was exporting arms to Israel when it was illegal. Now, they say it was for free. I guarantee that nobody in the mob does anything for free. So what was the quid pro quo with Israel? Well, it turned out that some Zionists, Israeli Zionists, had a bank in Switzerland that our friend Meyer Lansky was using to launder money, and he was the chief money launderer in the United States. They called him the mob's accountant, which is ridiculous. They called him the mob's banker, which is getting a little bit closer. But what he really was the mob's money launderer. So all these gangsters all over the country committing all these crimes, piling up all this money, it's a problem. Al Capone went to jail based on a tax evasion. So the handling of the money you make is not trivial. It's a big problem. And none of these guys had the sophistication to do it, with the exception of Meyer Lansky. And what did he do? He used a bank in Switzerland that happened to be owned by Zionists. I mean, so to take this full circle, you are being deliberately made ignorant by very active people. Like, they want to make sure that if there's 10 trillion words spoken about the Kennedy assassination, the words Zionist and Israel never come into the mix. And they're succeeding brilliantly. They're doing a great, great job. Okay? And that's what's going on. And again, it's not a matter of the Zionists did it. No, it's a matter of they are part of the mix of people who are destroying our country and destroying the world, right? And let's go back to the Kennedys. What made the Kennedys so unique, and why did they have to be murdered? They were the most independent people in the White House, possibly in the entire history of the White House. And I'm going back to Lincoln and Washington. Lincoln, nobody ever asked how Lincoln made his money. Lincoln made a lot of money. He wasn't always walking around with a stovepipe hat, you know. He made a lot of money as an attorney representing who? The biggest financial interests in the world, in the U.S. at that time, railroads. Okay, so when he went to the White House, he did a lot of great things, but he did a lot of things to help the railroad industry, and that wasn't always positive for Americans on the ground. Right? A lot of railroad people got very rich, and a lot of people in the countryside got impoverished when their land was, taken away for the railroads. So that's Lincoln. Now, Washington, great man. There would be no United States without George Washington. Epic human being. But he was a land dealer. He had a lot of dogs in the fight when it came to how the United States developed. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that he owned millions of acres of land, and he wanted the U.S. to develop along certain lines. Okay? Kennedys did not have that. Their father, Joseph Kennedy, was the fifth richest man in the world. Okay? And his money was in real estate and cash and stock holdings. And they love to slander Joseph Kennedy, but he was America first, right? He knew, by the way, about the dangers of the CIA and talked about them in the 50s. As did Truman, by the way. This was not odd conversation to be having in the 1950s. So so he put the sons in power. Both very talented guys, both very ambitious guys. Without their father, you never would have heard of them. Okay. Not only was Joseph Kennedy the fifth richest man in the United States, he was also a deeply embedded Democratic Party power broker. Okay, he almost ran for president himself. He helped FDR get elected. So he had not only he had the money, he also had the on-the-ground political connections. And this is another part you never hear about Joseph Kennedy. He was Mr. Hollywood. Okay, this is like shocking to people, but there was a day when making movies was doing this, right? You got one guy, you got some actors, maybe you have an assistant, and that's it. All right. Well, how did filmmaking make the leap to, the Hollywood star factory with the big studios and the sound stages and all, 50,000 people working on a film? It goes back to money, doesn't it? This is cheap. This is easy to do. It's artisanal, right? The other is high finance. Joseph Kennedy went out from Boston with his banking knowledge and his money, and he modernized the financing structure of Hollywood. Right? He helped Hollywood make the transition from silent films to talkies, which was a very expensive transition. I bring it up because his third, besides being rich and besides being completely, welded to the Democratic Party operatives throughout the whole nation, he also was an expert by osmosis on star making. All right. And that's why a young man from Boston became president of the United States. But the real point I want to make here is that young man was beholden to no one. Okay. He didn't need anybody's money in particular. So he was the most U.S. America first, citizens first president imaginable. All right. And we certainly didn't have many of those in the 20th century. And that's why he had to be killed, because he was looking around the world saying, why are we beating up these other countries? It's not good for these people. It's not ethical. It's not good for our relations long term. We're in this ideological battle with communism. If we're beating up on poor countries, well, we're going to lose that battle. That's where the Kennedys were at. They were going after organized crime. They were going after, some of the cartels in the United States, like the steel industry at the time. And they were going after the criminals who ran and continue to run Israel. And they were against coups, and they were against assassinations, etc., etc., etc. And they had to go. All right. Vietnam was only, people say, in fact, one great film director, helped perpetuate the true meme that one of the reasons the Kennedys had to go was he was going to interfere with the banking operation going on in Vietnam. And what was that about? Well, Vietnam's a rich country. Could be a rich country, has oil, still not developed. Not all oil is developed. They keep a lot of it on tap for future use. And they sure didn't want communists or socialists or anybody or Asians getting their hands on that oil. And of course, war is a moneymaker. That's how the Rothschilds and other bankers have made their money. What do? You can't go again, everything costs money, costs big money, right? Like imagine taking your family out to dinner. It's like a big financial enterprise. Well, imagine taking 1 million guys out to dinner, arming them, putting them in uniforms, transporting them, housing them, training them. Did I say arming? Making sure they have ammunition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and all the equipment they need. That's expensive. So where do you get that money? You borrow it from bankers, directly or indirectly. And then on the other side, so that's this side. This has been going on since the beginning of time. I was reading about post Alexander the Great Egypt. Same thing was going on then thousands of years ago, or is it thousands? Well, it's a long time ago. People have ambitions. They come up with financial plans. They raise the money. In the case of ancient Egypt, they raise the money by taxing the farmers to death. It's always the same thing. So on the one hand, you lend the money to the empire makers who want to go out and conquer whatever and steal whatever they can. And then on the other hand, you finance who? You finance the arms makers. So it's this endless loop. You give these guys money, which you get interest on, and then you give these guys money, which you get profits from. And it just goes round and round, and the money just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Kennedys were an impediment to that. And if people want to understand why the Zionist genocide operators in Israel are allowed to persist, is because they're operating along the sides of the big money. Now, people call it capitalism. They call it colonial, colonial, whatever, imperial colonialism. I don't know. They throw around all these college terms. It's gangsters with a huge amount of money doing what gangsters do. And what do gangsters do? They lie, they cheat, they steal, and they kill. And then, to the extent they need to, they cover up and pay off all the judges and all the DAs and all the cops and all the whatever. It's gangsterism. So it's, this term, like, there's too many academic terms, there's too many academic people, there's too many academically oriented people talking about this and not cutting to the chase. For example, they call it the real state. Now that was a big innovation. It was an important innovation, Peter Dale Scott. And he showed that when you go deep, or the deep state, did I call it the deep state? Yeah, the deep state. When you go deep enough, you find out that politicians are involved with organized crime figures, who are involved with, psycho right-wing fascists, who are involved with this, who are involved with that. By the way, Peter Dale Scott, he included everybody in his analysis. He would not include the Zionists. I don't know why. Like I say, everywhere you look, they are. LBJ, Meyer Lansky, James Jesus Angleton. They're everywhere you look. But he didn't want to go there. Nobody wants to go there. Maybe now that they're carrying out, this is, atrocity doesn't begin to describe it. Genocide doesn't begin to describe it. There's no words for the criminality and the horror that Israel is in, the government of Israel, with the support of its people. Its people think it's great. Well, more than 50% are on board with the genocide. It's a thoroughly brainwashed society that I would say is pretty soulless, and they're all about themselves and the hell with everybody else. And that's who big money put into Palestine, because they wanted gangsters, button men. There's that phrase in organized crime, button men. What does that mean? That they're wearing nice buttons? No, it means you push a button and they do what you want them to do. Let's go back to the Suez Canal, and then we'll end this. Big money interests happened to be the Rothschilds, kick-started the Suez Canal. Big money interests put fascist-oriented maniac Zionists into Palestine. When that canal was taken by the Egyptians, wasn't the people that owned the canal that sent their armies. It was Israel that came out and started fighting the Egyptians. Does nobody ask questions about how that worked? Right? It's all about money. And I think we need to stop calling it the deep state, because that implies you have to be a scholar and you have to read 10,000 books. We should call it the real state. And it's not capitalism, though capitalism has its problems. You don't want the world run by capitalism, right? By capital, right? That's not a good idea. Because if capital decides that it's profitable to kill everybody, they'll kill everybody, right? So capitalism is not perfect. Free enterprise is getting a lot closer to the mark. But we should stop calling it the deep state. It's creating a cloud. It's creating fog. We should call it the real state. Okay, and the real state, it's not colonial imperialism or capitalism or any of these other things, these college words that these guys like to throw around. Excuse me. It's gangsterism. Okay, the real state is a gangster state, and it's run by gangsters, and we know that because you can hardly find with the exception of the Kennedys, you can hardly find a president, including Trump. I don't know about Biden. Biden's just a straight up criminal. He didn't need organized crime. Maybe, but I bet if you dug deep, you'd find organized crime connections with him. Who else? The Bushes, very friendly with organized crime figures. Nixon, his best buddy, was an organized crime banker in Florida. Carter, he had a few. Maybe not Eisenhower. FDR, everybody was involved in organized crime because of prohibition. It's somebody either you were drinking or you were, so that's a little tricky. But anyway, bottom line is a lot of connections between, you know, squeaky clean politicians and organized crime. Certainly, the banks run all these politicians. It's big money pursuing big money's interests. That's why we have European genocidal maniacs in Israel slaughtering civilians daily on live stream, and Europe doesn't seem to care. UK doesn't seem to care. The US doesn't seem to care. The so-called global South, they care a lot. And guys, this will be this will never be forgotten. 1,000 years from now, the global South will remember this. I mean, the destruction. I mean, if you wanted to destroy Israel, if you wanted to slander Judaism, and by the way, Judaism is not Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism. Judaism is not Zionism. Zionism is not. They are like this. Okay, but if you wanted to confuse the confusable and destroy the reputation of Judaism, you would do exactly what the U.S. and the Israeli government is doing right now. You do it. This is the way to destroy Israel. This is the way to tarnish the reputation of Judaism. I mean, it's obvious that this is the problem, but it doesn't matter because they're carrying out the function, and the function is to eradicate, erase, obliterate Gaza, the people of Gaza. And, we've forgotten, and I don't know why people don't keep talking about this, they found trillions of dollars worth of gas reserves off the coast of where? Gaza. Who owns that gas? Whoever owns Gaza. All right. So this is all money. It's not the deep state. It's the real state. It's not capitalism. It's gangsterism, pure and simple. Those are the people that call the shots. And to the extent, and to the extent that we're ignorant, and this is what this whole program is about today, is the thorough, comprehensive, never-ending program to make sure you never understand who the Kennedys really were, what they were fighting against, that you never understand why there are crazed, maniacal, Zionist genocide operators they've been there since they committed, they didn't have the weapons to do it in 1948. So they just shot people with guns, straight up, unarmed people. And they didn't have missiles. They didn't have bombs. They didn't have the U.S. providing, intelligence, right? They did as much killing as they could in 1948. They're the same people. This genocide's been nonstop. And they've been terrorists since they arrived. They shot when the British were running it. They assassinated police officers. They assassinated military officials. They bombed bridges. They bombed railroads. They bombed the hotel. I think it's Hotel David, killing Jewish workers. They didn't care. They're gangsters. So we're seeing the reality of who runs the world as clearly as it can possibly be made. And to take this full circle, this is why the Kennedys were murdered, and why the cover-up will go on forever, and why anybody that wants to talk about the details, the fine points, is forever going to be put to the sidelines. We want to hear about who shined Jack Ruby's shoes the day before he shot Oswald. That we can find out. All these other things that I've been talking about on this call, you'll not be able to find out. This has been Brass Check on July 1st. Independence Day is coming up soon. To all our supporters, thank you. We're doing our best not only to do this research and to compile it and to make it comprehensible, but to give it to you. And now we're trying, and we need your help to get it onto some of the big podcasts. So all these basic facts of history can be part of every American's understanding of the world. That's it. That's the plan. Let's hope. Let's hope it goes. All right. Bye.
Brass Last Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.